Ray Blanton, a target of a federal investigation.
Governor Ray Blanton either had knowledge of or participated in a scheme in the governor's office to sell pardons to state prisoners, including 26 murderers.
How much money would this one cost, and how much money would that one cost?
People were paying cash for their release.
These people were buying their way out of prison, and I knew it.
We haven't sold a single one.
There's a promise of really big payday.
How much would it cost to get Ray out?
James Earl Ray, who is in prison for killing Martin Luther King.
Are you going to be signing any commutations tonight?
Well, that remains to be seen.
His 99-year sentence for first-degree murder commuted by Governor Ray Blanton.
It was like tossing a match in a can of gasoline.
The governor's office was involved in the killing of one of the people who knew the most about the pardon and parole scandal.
And what the hell are you going to do about it? And I said, you don't want to know.
It's one of Tennessee's most notorious scandals. Inmates released from prison because they have the money to pay. It's a story more than 4 decades old, but it's rarely talked about because those involved have rarely talked about it. In a way that's never been done before, we shed light on how political differences were erased to end one of the state's most corrupt chapters.
Would you raise your right hand? You solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give this hearing to be the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
No matter how deeply buried under layers of lies.
Would you state your name for the record and your official title?
I'm Eddie Sisk, and I'm legal counsel to the governor.
The truth.
Why? Why'd you do it?
Almost always comes out.
Temptation of all that money.
It was a cold day in Nashville, and I was writing my acceptance speech, and the phone rang about noon.
I remember distinctly the day I got to work early, and I was just walking the hallways thinking about this case.
That Governor Ray Blanton either had knowledge of or participated in a scheme in the governor's office to sell pardons to state prisoners.
To this day, then U.S. Attorney Hal Hardin and Governor-elect Lamar Alexander try not to think about January 17, 1979. But it's a hard day to forget.
I decided that I would call Lamar.
The secretary said, Hal Hardin wants to talk with you.
I'm not calling you as the United States Attorney. I'm calling you as a Tennessean who's got some knowledge that I think you need to know.
Governor Blanton's promised to pardon at least 6 other inmates.
Blanton was considering other unapproved releases.
Governor Blanton was about to release from custody some prisoners who were the subject of a federal grand jury investigation.
There have been federal charges Blanton's administration took bribes for the pardons.
He said, Lamar, I'm calling as a citizen to ask you to take office early. The FBI has evidence that Governor Blanton is about to release a large number of prisoners who'd paid cash to obtain their release, including one big name, he said.
A long life, longevity has its place.
Some people speculated that might be James Earl Ray, who is in prison for killing Martin Luther King.
The apostle of nonviolence in the civil rights movement has been shot to death in Memphis, Tennessee.
And so I set about spending the entire afternoon trying to think about how can we accomplish this coup in a way that's most appropriate, what's never been done before in our country so far as I know.
My beautiful wife.
4 years ago today, January 18th, 1975, Ray Blanton becomes governor of Tennessee. On that day, almost no one would have believed his administration would end so abruptly in scandal and disgrace. After all,
Governor Ray Blanton's time in office from 1975 to 1979 was filled with scandal from the start.
It is doubtful history will be kind to the one-term governor.
The FBI became interested just as soon as Blanton and his crowd took office, there was trouble all through the Department of Transportation, highway construction project bid rigging.
I don't want to discuss cases with you. They'll be on record and they'll be on file.
There was a saying at that time that anything that wasn't tacked down was for sale in the state. Liquor license allegations and even real estate license.
He had barely gotten into office, and already they're asking him questions about these dirty tricks, that kind of stuff. So there was a lot of distrust from the very first.
Blanton blamed it all on personal animosity, especially among members of the news media.
Blanton was sort of a low-level political operative. And in 1972, when Senator Howard Baker took a campaign train across the state, we had pretty good evidence that Blanton and his allies had tried to grease the tracks with Crisco to make the train run off the tracks. Now, that sounds kind of ridiculous, but I'm pretty sure it was true.
By 1977, the FBI was investigating Blanton's administration for selling state-owned cars. But spinning violently at the center of this tornado of trouble were rumors surrounding the pardon and parole system.
Blanton says he was only doing what other governors have done.
This stuff was coming out about these names, these characters. They're going into the system, and now there's movement to start to try to get them out by other than the normal legal process. It was by the payment of money.
As governor, Blanton had sole power to issue clemency to prisoners, a common act to release inmates deemed rehabilitated, and a done deed once the governor's name is signed on the paperwork.
It was nothing short of brazen arrogance for the governor.
But the question under this administration, were the inmates ready to be released?
Acting on the excuse of relieving overcrowded conditions in the prison.
Or did pardons and commutations come for a price?
It has now spawned an ever-widening federal investigation.
There was some skullduggery going on, and that the FBI had information that maybe even people were paying cash for their release.
We're going, it's not, this isn't possible. And if it was possible, nobody would have the gall to do something like that.
Talk of questionable releases became more than just rumor, starting with Roger Humphreys.
It only seemed to get more sticky for the governor at every turn.
In 1975, the Johnson City man was convicted of killing his ex-wife and her friend John Skoll 2 years prior.
He shot them repeatedly at close range, reloading his pistol 8 times.
He even confessed to the murders. Sentenced to 20 to 40 years in prison at Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary, a place housing the state's most dangerous criminals. But he wouldn't serve nearly that much time.
It transpired that Roger Humphreys' father was a political friend of Governor Blanton.
Roger Humphreys, the son of a former Blanton patronage chief.
Governor Blanton had said he was going to pardon Roger Humphreys, who was from Johnson City and who had killed his former wife and her lover with a 2-shot Derringer by shooting them a dozen times, which means he had to reload 6 times in order to do it. And Blanton had said he was a nice young man, he was going to pardon him. That created a big storm.
Less than 2 months after his sentencing, a reporter spotted Humphreys, not behind bars, but unattended, taking pictures on Capitol grounds.
First, Blanton gave him a cushy state photographer's job, even though Humphreys had been behind bars just a few months.
Paying him $100 a month and arranged for him to have a state car.
And we had photos of Roger Humphreys out on the state capitol steps with his camera. He had a credit card, he had a state job. It was fairly amazing.
That led into a major and long-running controversy about what was going on.
There were problems in that administration, and Roger Humphreys became sort of the poster boy of a profound problem.
And all of a sudden he is out taking photographs. This became a scandal, even a national scandal.
I'm an elected politician. I have the authority, I have the trust of the people that elected me.
Blanton rejected any wrongdoing.
And it's all part of the political process.
Buckling down on his decision to let Humphreys out of his cell to take pictures for the state photographer's office.
That there would be no parole supervision or restrictions on most
And the night I had the Roger Humphreys story, all hell broke loose in terms of the Blanton administration calling WSM and saying, the governor wants to come to the studio and do an interview with Carol Marin in the studio live.
Thank you for coming, Governor.
It's a pleasure.
First and foremost, the case of Roger Humphreys, serving 20 to 40 years for murder.
During the interview with Carol Marin, he promised Humphreys would be released from prison before serving his full sentence.
He merited this. And I'm going to announce to you now that before I go out of office, he's going to be pardoned.
Can you explain that decision, Governor?
Very simply. I feel like he merited it.
I say to Blanton, he's a convicted double murderer. And he said, well, he hasn't killed anybody since he got out of prison.
At one point during the interview, unprompted, he denied paroles were up for sale.
We haven't sold a single one. I don't know whether previous administrations can say that or not, but we haven't.
This was the beginning of what was called the clemency for cash scandal.
The interview sparked a firestorm of headlines and a petition to collect 1 million signatures, urging Blanton to keep Humphreys behind bars.
Let me explain it to you simple enough where you can understand it. Vocational aptitude, ability, trustworthiness, and the fact that he's performed. Now, can you understand that?
He came to WSM to lynch me, and ultimately he lynched himself.
He hasn't murdered anyone. He hasn't run off.
He murdered 2 people before he came to prison.
Since he's been in prison, he has not. I think that Roger Humphreys is an outstanding, fine young man, and I intend to pardon him before I leave office.
Around the time Roger Humphreys' seemingly favorable treatment was making headlines, Marie Rejanti, a 33-year-old appointed chair of the State Pardon and Paroles Board in 1976, was the first to come forward with special insight on suspected corruption within the administration, saying the governor's legal counsel, Eddie Sisk, and other top aides pinned pardons and commutations up for sale with a list of names, including Humphreys.
He got a job right away, and he was granted, he could go out during the day, didn't even have to stay in prison. And there were just things like that going on willy-nilly, and I began to challenge them. I became convinced that there was only one thing to do, and I did it. Which was to go to the FBI.
We were hearing rumors, and then kind of Marie put a little bit more, we had a little bit more confidence that something was going on that would deserve some investigation.
And then I began to think about other controversial cases, and some of these people had been granted clemency, and when I saw the full correctional file, I was aghast because it was clear to me that some of those people should have never been released. These people were buying their way out of prison, and I knew it.
Billy Cole was another guy he came up early in the investigation because they got him out almost right away.
Billy Cole was serving a 25-year prison sentence for armed robbery, suspected of cutting a $10,000 deal to get out, despite being the suspect of a double murder.
So, he was somebody that we thought didn't need to be on the street.
Court records suggest Cole worked with Sisk, approaching inmates who were willing to pay money to get out of prison, including murderer Jimmy Pendleton, accused of trying to arrange a $5,000 deal to get out on time served, but was rejected when he didn't have the money to pay.
It was offensive, very offensive to us.
Marie continued feeding information to the FBI without the board knowing it, until, she says, Sisk fired her without reason from her position as chair.
That old saying about looking in the mirror, can you live with yourself? And I could. I knew I had done my best and what I believed was right.
Coming up, blood on the hands of the Blanton administration as thousands of dollars is paid for the promise of freedom, and growing fears that Martin Luther King's killer could get out next.
There's a promise of really big payday.
Some people speculated that might be James Earl Ray.
He was paid by former Tennessee Governor Ray Blanton's administration to kill Petty John.
He said $20,000, and I should give you the date he'll be released.
Why did I get involved? Yeah. Temptation of all that money.
While the cash for clemency scandal was catching the attention of the FBI, Lamar Alexander was hoping to catch the attention of Tennesseans.
I think the people can make their own judgment. I've got confidence in the intelligence of the voters.
The 38-year-old was on the campaign trail, trying to sway Tennesseans to vote a Republican into office as its next governor.
I literally walked across the state. I started in Maryville, walked to Mountain City, and I spent the night with 73 different families, most of whom I hadn't known before. It really helped me win the election and helped me be a better governor.
I think people have made their minds up based on sizing us up.
Alexander beat out the Democrat Jake Butcher from Knoxville by more than 100,000 votes. And without Blanton seeking re-election, Lamar Alexander would be Tennessee's 45th governor.
Alexander says the poll-taking, major campaign rallies.
As Alexander was preparing to take over office in a little more than a month, the FBI zeroed in even more on the Blanton administration and the mounting evidence of a cash for clemency scandal. FBI Special Agents Hank Hillen and Richard Knudsen were working the case, naming the investigation codename Tenpar, accusing some of the men working for Blanton of using the governor's office as a criminal enterprise, arranging roughly $300,000 in bribes to reduce the sentences of nearly 20 prisoners, or, for the right price, set them free.
These people were being contacted by, quote, representatives of the administration type thing, and that if money would be paid, why somebody could be gotten out. It was that type of situation.
I actually got a visit.
Defense attorney Jack Lowry was representing Will Midget, who was serving time for second-degree murder from a deadly car crash, when he got a visit at his office from a man who called himself Bob Roundtree.
And it was a Friday afternoon, kind of raining, and just about quitting time. This guy comes in, he's smoking a cigar, got on a flowery shirt. And he said, I understand you've also applied for executive clemency. And I said, yeah. He said, I think I can be of some help to you. I said, you can? He said, yes. And he stood up at that time and pulled out a wad of money out of his pocket. He said, I need to keep this conversation confidential, and I need to hire you as my lawyer. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, $20,000, and I can give you the date he'll be released, and he won't have to go to Florida. And when he said he won't have to go to Florida, I thought, oh, hell. He's had X. Nobody knew about that. It's in that report. Marie, Eddie, and me were the only people that I think at that time had seen my report. So about 7 o'clock that night, I called Marie Reggiani. I remembered, I've got her number. Called her at home. I told her the story, and I won't ever forget what she said. I described the guy to her, told her what had happened. She said, oh my God, I don't know how high this goes.
It verifies to us that this situation is going to involve the highest part of the Tennessee state government.
That has now spawned an ever-widening federal investigation.
We have several other people during the course of the investigation are telling us these things that are happening, and it always comes back to Eddie Sisk.
Eddie Sisk, the legal advisor to the governor on all matters, including pardons and clemencies, accused of lying to the Pardons and Paroles Board on several occasions to convince them to draw up paperwork to let prisoners out early. Prisoners like murderer Larkin Bibbs Jr., who admitted to paying $15,000 to get out after serving just 4 months of a 10 to 15-year prison sentence. And William Scharf on death row. The FBI says was told his death sentence could be reduced to 10 years for $45,000. diamond rings, coin collections, and a grandfather clock, all used as alleged payment to stop armed robbers from being extradited to Georgia.
The money involved was $10,000 to get a friend or a loved one out of prison. There was one case that I remember where the amount of money involved was $90,000.
That's how greedy they were. That here comes the money and he's gone.
Court records show Sisk tried to cut a deal with John Henry Gant for $20,000, a man serving time for first-degree murder for the shooting death of a 4-year-old girl.
I was working with the FBI and they were sharing information with me about it. They were taking promissory notes on some of the releases, some of those prisoners. People couldn't pay. They were taking damn promissory notes, if you can imagine.
Commutation papers for dozens of inmates, several serving time for murder, were accused of paying between $2,000 and almost $100,000 in what was dubbed a release ring, or making their way to the governor's desk.
There was an abundance of evidence that this prisoner was involved in these discussions with these representatives of the conspiracy.
I really think my case was the first test. I think they were going to test that situation with me because Eddie knew me.
Federal indictments were executed in a surprise announcement by the FBI, which made a raid on the state Capitol building.
The FBI seemed to be taking everything they could get their hands on. The agents came prepared, carrying boxes to haul away documents pertaining to the pardons and parole system.
December 15th, 1978, the FBI raided the Capitol, arresting 3 Blanton aides, including Eddie Sisk, caught with marked $100 bills in his pocket.
Already seen 3 Blanton aides arrested and thousands of state records seized.
3 of Blanton's aides were indicted in the parole for pay scandal.
Mr. T. Edward Sisk was arrested.
Also arrested, Blanton bodyguard and Tennessee Highway Patrol Lieutenant Fred Taylor, the accused middleman between prospective buyers of clemency and Eddie Sisk.
Also, Charles Benson.
And extradition officer Charles Benson, who worked directly under Eddie Sisk. He was arrested just before boarding a flight at the Nashville airport, caught carrying clemency papers for Rusty Denton, who was serving 60 years for a triple murder out of Cock County known as the Red Lantern Massacre. Convicted of opening fire at a nightclub early Christmas morning in 1975. The FBI says $85,000 was already paid to cut his 60-year sentence to 9, but agents feared another deal was on the table. For $40,000 more, he could be a free man.
The audacity that somebody is infamous as Rusty Denton, and then here he is up for a commutation. Really bothered me.
In 1981, Eddie Sisk and Fred Taylor pled guilty to conspiring to sell clemencies to inmates, each sentenced to 5 years in prison.
Tennessee Highway Patrolman Charles Frederick Taylor, age 40, a 15-year veteran with the Highway Patrol stationed here in Nashville.
Why'd you do it? Get involved?
Why did I get involved?
Yeah.
Temptation of all that money.
I guess that's the thing I've never understood. You were carrying the badge at that time.
I don't understand it either, Dick.
And it's as hard as we'd all work, our various agencies together to get involved. And I'm just curious as what happened to you.
I don't understand it either. I just fell to the temptation of the large amounts of money. I saw other people spending a lot of money, and me, a policeman living on a policeman's salary, run around with them throwing money away. I think as I look back on it and try to figure out why the hell I did it, It's supposed to be stronger than that. And I always thought I was. I never took a quarter.
Just tell him that.
Never took a quarter in my life.
Charles Benson was acquitted.
He was just working there, and he did what Eddie told him to do. Eddie told him to get these documents signed. He testified that day that they were arrested, Fred had called back from Memphis and asked to speak to Charlie. And Fred says something to the effect that these documents are not signed, and the guy's not going to pay until the documents are signed. Charlie's position was Eddie was in the room and he handed Eddie the phone. Charlie, that's what Charlie testified to, that it was the deal between Eddie and Fred.
Governor Blanton continued to deny any knowledge of the scheme, but the FBI was not convinced this was the end.
Chattanooga business owner Sam Pettyjohn was shot to death outside the club he owned on Market.
The governor's office was involved in the killing of one of the people who knew the most about the pardon and parole scandal.
In 2021, Blanton's office was connected to the murder of Samuel Pettyjohn, who was secretly providing information to the FBI.
This guy had been a really, good informant, had helped send people to us and stuff like that. So we're going, this thing's not ended yet.
He was paid by former Tennessee Governor Ray Blanton's administration to kill Pettyjohn.
There were 2 or 3 other mysterious murders during that period of time that still, there's no answer for.
He was just one more person. We had several people, and I don't remember everybody, who had died prematurely or had been killed involved in this investigation.
Bob Roundtree, whose real name was William Aubrey Thompson, was convicted for his role in the parole buying scheme. He agreed to cooperate with the FBI under one condition. The FBI couldn't ask him about Pettyjohn's murder.
It confirmed to me how pervasive and illegal and corrupt this was, how many people were involved, how much was at stake, and how deep it went.
Coming up, more than 50 prisoners, many of them murderers, are set free in the middle of the night, and Governor Blanton promises more are on the way. With concerns that Memphis's most famous killer could be set free, a secret plan goes in place to stop it.
He had granted executive clemency to another 52 prisoners, including 26 murderers.
His 99-year sentence for first-degree murder commuted.
Let's ask him about James Earl Ray, who killed Martin Luther King. How much would it cost to get Ray out?
Did you sign any papers tonight?
Sure did.
How many?
Could he empty the entire prison? He said yes.
And what the hell are you going to do about it? And I said, you don't want to know.
Inauguration is set for January the 20th.
The week of Lamar Alexander's inauguration, scheduled for Saturday, January 20th, 1979, word circulated that Governor Blanton had intentions to release dangerous prisoners at the center of the parole for pay scandal. Whispers spread that Monday that top Republicans and Democrats thought Alexander should be sworn in early to stop it.
And it was that night that Governor Blanton drove down to the Capitol, 7 o'clock at night, called in the Secretary of State, and pardoned 52 people or issued commutations, including Roger Humphreys, many of whom the FBI believed had paid cash for their release.
With only 4 days left in office, Blanton stunned the state with a middle-of-the-night announcement that he had granted executive clemency to another 52 prisoners, including 26 murderers.
His 99-year sentence for first-degree murder commuted by Governor Ray Blanton.
Paperwork had been signed that night in an extraordinary after-hours signing session in the governor's office.
Earlier in the day, they had prepared commutation papers for 33 inmates serving time in Tennessee prisons. The papers awaited only the governor's signature.
It was a surprising move. He did this at midnight. It went national.
In one of his last acts as governor of Tennessee, Ray Blanton, a target of a federal investigation of an alleged parole selling scheme, has cut the sentences of a number of murderers and other convicts.
A lot of these folks have been convicted of serious crimes, murder, rape, in some cases multiple murders.
34 were granted without the approval of the Pardons and Paroles Board.
Incoming Governor Lamar Alexander called the pardons sickening and said Blanton's latest actions were a disgrace to the office.
That's when, the stuff on these board of pardons and paroles go, no, they can't. They can't do that. But by gosh, they did.
The most controversial of the latest group of prisoners to be freed is Roger Humphreys, the son of a former Blanton patronage chief.
My gut reaction to the Humphreys release was that it was sickening, that it was disgraceful to the office of governor and contemptuous to the people of the state.
Both father and son say they want the murderer of Susan Garrett Humphreys to serve the prison time meted out by the jury that convicted him.
Governor Blanton said he could look our family in the eye and say there was nothing wrong with what he was doing, and I'd like him to.
It was amazing. It was amazing. Nobody ever thought that he'd do that, go that far.
Acting on the excuse of relieving overcrowded conditions in the prisons, to pardon and commute the sentences of over 50 inmates earlier this week, especially Roger Humphreys.
It was like tossing a match in a can of gasoline to this scandal.
It looked like he might have done that because he thought I might take office early, and he was obligated to let some of those people out.
Did you sign any papers tonight?
Sure did.
How many?
I would guess about 52.
Commutation papers.
Part of them are pardons, part of them are commutations, and part of them are time served cuts.
It was close to the end of his term, and the governor just had the gall not only to do that, but to announce it, to let it be known.
Half hour after Governor Blanton began reviewing commutation papers, Secretary of State Gentry Crowell arrived at the Capitol. He told me that the governor had called him at home and asked him to come to Capitol Hill because he planned to sign some papers.
Blanton could, if he so chose, let a whole bunch of people out of prison for all the wrong reasons.
So I'd asked the State Attorney General Bill Leach, I said, tell me what the Constitution says about pardons. Can they be revoked? He said no. Once they're done, they're done. The governor has the absolute authority. And I said, could he empty the entire prison? He said yes.
Blanton was considering other unapproved releases. 5 of those possibilities involved inmates who are being investigated by federal authorities in connection with the alleged clemency buying scandal.
On Tuesday, it all blew up. And still, I was hoping it went away.
And he says he is not through yet.
I don't want to discuss cases with you. They'll be on record and they'll be on file.
There were more clemencies coming. There were more questionable acts out of this governor's office.
What are you going to be doing?
Tending to a little work.
With your legal counsel and C. Mary Henderson, are you going to be signing any commutations tonight?
Well, that remains to be seen.
Blanton's attorney, Robert Lillard, announced that the governor was planning to pardon more people, including one big name, he said.
There's a promise of a really big payday. There's a real big commutation they're going to ask for.
Some people speculated that might be James Earl Ray, who is in prison for killing Martin Luther King.
Good evening. Dr. Martin Luther King, the apostle of nonviolence in the civil rights movement, has been shot to death in Memphis, Tennessee.
I just want to do God's will.
America is shocked and saddened by the brutal slaying tonight of Dr. Martin Luther King.
They had good reason to worry James Earl Ray could be set free. Part of the FBI's investigation was with an undercover informant in a Memphis motel room with Blanton bodyguard and Tennessee Highway Patrol Lieutenant Fred Taylor, seeing how far they were willing to go.
It was an incredible conversation if you listen to the tape. I mean, how much money would this one cost and how much money would that one cost?
They took a break and smoked a cigarette, and outside said, all right, let's see how far we can push them.
Let's see how far these guys will go.
Who is the baddest person in our state prison?
Let's ask him about James Earl Ray, who kills Martin Luther King. How much would it cost to get Ray out? And Trooper kind of taken aback by that, and he said something to the effect of, "Damn, that's a hot one." Now, I don't know if the governor can commute his sentence, but maybe for $75,000 we could arrange for an escape. And that shows you how far they would go.
Nobody doubted that something got to be done.
Governor Ray Blanton was intending to commute the sentences or pardon persons who were the target of the federal investigation.
The day that all this came together, if you will, was January 17th.
Governor Blanton was about to release from custody some prisoners who were the subject of a federal grand jury investigation that is taking place now. And
I got to work early. I was just walking the hallways thinking about this case because it was not only on my mind, it was a national issue. It was an embarrassment. It was a scandal. It was just like we were spinning out of control.
With time working against them, U.S. Attorney Hal Hardin sat in his office with FBI agents who told him there was a new list of inmates who were willing to pay or had already paid for their release, whose clemency papers were being drawn up.
He said, look, he says he's got 13 commutations and pardons that are being typed up, getting ready to go. And he's going to sign those very quickly. And some of them, one or two of them, were subjects that we were investigating.
We're coming down to the wire at the end of the administration for Blanton. He's already issued a bunch of these commutations. Now the word is he's going to do some more.
Blanton was considering other unapproved releases. 5 of those possibilities involved inmates who are being investigated by federal authorities.
It developed that James Earl Ray, was not, but people didn't know that he wasn't involved. He could have been, and he had tried to escape once before.
That infamous escape was with notorious bank robber Larry Hacker, a man Agent Knudsen had chased for years and even had a near-deadly confrontation with him and his gang.
They had the firepower and sat there and talked about whether they're going to shoot us through the door. We dealt with people who had killed other people, so they were dangerous.
Hardin and the FBI got word that the big name set to be released was not James Earl Ray, but Larry Hacker, with a $50,000 price tag for freedom. The FBI believed Sisk and Taylor agreed it would be too risky to ask the Pardon and Paroles Board to approve his release, so instead requested a blank commutation form and had the governor's appointments secretary, Kenneth Lavender, sign Ray Blanton's name on the signature line. Taylor was allegedly overheard saying, "We're working 7 or 8 deals like this, but it could be as many as 30 who get out."
With Governor Blanton's promise to pardon at least 6 other inmates before he leaves office Saturday, there is most likely going to be a lot more reaction.
With just 3 days until Inauguration Day, they all knew the papers could be signed at any moment.
And so that's when we go, have got to get this stopped. We don't need more people out there being commuted.
How sure are you, and how sure is the FBI about everything that you're telling me? And he said, I'm absolutely sure, and we're absolutely sure. I said, okay. And he got up to leave, and he said, and what the hell are you going to do about it? And I said, you don't want to know.
The FBI has filed affidavits with a federal grand jury saying that Governor Ray Blanton either had knowledge of or participated in a scheme in the governor's office to sell pardons to state prisoners.
And decided that I was just going to call Lamar.
The call was urging the incoming governor to consider taking office 3 days early, their best chance to stop dangerous criminals from paying to get back on the streets.
What I thought was, I'm not going to do that. That's not the way we do things in our country. I mean, we're not a banana republic. We don't have coups. The most unique thing about our country, about our democracy in many ways, is the peaceful transfer of power with grace from one party to another. That's the way our country works. I've never heard of a newly elected person just taking office. I can't do that.
In no circumstances was I eligible to take office until midnight last night, and all of the deeds had been done by that.
It just progressed until the time that, we decided we had to do something about it.
And so I set about spending the entire afternoon trying to think about how can we accomplish this coup in a way that's most appropriate, what's never been done before in our country so far as I know.
Coming up, a day of secret meetings to stop a new list of murderers from getting set free that night. A coup could end the scandal for good or bring even more trouble to Tennessee.
Blanton was considering other unapproved releases.
Time is running out. We don't have any time. We got to do this.
This is the kind of thing where 50 things can go wrong and 49 of them probably will.
The first Tennessee governor ever to be stripped of his powers.
God help us if we're wrong in what we're doing here.
I'm ashamed for the state of Tennessee for this action today.
Governor Blanton is about to release one or more persons from prison who are targets of a United States investigation into alleged payoffs for pardons and commutations of sentences.
That Wednesday afternoon, a small handful of attorneys, including Hal Hardin and Lamar Alexander, spent hours locked in a hotel room in downtown Nashville, secretly scheming how to legally oust their Democratic governor and replace him with a Republican.
All of this came about very, very suddenly after a day of secret meetings between the House Speaker and the Lieutenant Governor and the U.S. Attorney and the State Attorney General.
This is the kind of thing where 50 things can go wrong and 49 of them probably will.
Of course, all of this is aimed at preventing former Governor Ray Blanton from releasing any other state prisoners.
What is the law involved in it, and how right are we? And there was a lot of arguments about the law.
Is it constitutional? If it's constitutional, is it the right thing to do?
At midnight Tuesday, Alexander was eligible to take the oath of office, although there was some uncertainty about that.
What's going to happen if we are wrong? I mean, God help us if we're wrong in what we're doing here. This is not going to play well in Peoria.
The possibility that targets of the federal investigation might be released from prison.
I just came to the conclusion, I said, look, we can debate this forever, but time is running out. We don't have any time. We got to do this or X is going to happen. Let's do it. And if we're wrong, then the courts will tell us you were wrong and you shouldn't have done it. And we'll take the medicine that way. But let's go do it and get it over with. And that's what we did.
It is in the best interest of the people of Tennessee for the governor-elect to assume that office immediately. Mr. Chief Justice, I am ready to take the oath of office.
Please place your left hand upon the Bible. Raise your right hand and repeat after me.
Lamar Alexander was sworn in that Wednesday night, 3 days before he was scheduled to take office, in a very small ceremony surrounded by his family, a few state leaders, and the press.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Well, it was like a funeral.
There was nothing satisfying about this. There was no dancing in the end zone.
These are not very happy days for Tennessee. This is not a happy day for me.
It was very somber. It was like being at a funeral parlor after a death where nobody knows what to say to one another. And I knew that even though I wasn't the governor yet, I had to be in charge.
The Governor Blanton was about to let out of a state prison one or more persons who were the targets of a grand jury investigation into alleged payoffs in connection with pardons and paroles.
Just as Alexander raised his right hand and placed his left on the Bible to take the oath of office, Blanton was told the news. He'd been kicked out and replaced as governor.
I'm ashamed for the state of Tennessee for this action today.
Although the former governor was ashamed for Tennessee, his removal was brought about because many lawmakers and Tennesseans were ashamed of Ray Blanton.
And that, along with Blanton's threats to release more prisoners, resulted in his unprecedented removal from power, almost in involuntary exile.
Thank you, folks.
The first Tennessee governor ever to be stripped of his powers.
I think everybody involved felt like, at the end of the day, this is what we had to do, and we did it.
We had some really tough Democrats, all of them, who rose to the occasion and did something they thought was the right thing to do for their state. And true to their word, stood right up there with me and didn't backpedal an inch.
We now have a new governor in the state of Tennessee. Governor Lamar Alexander is no longer the governor-elect. He has been sworn in early, as he explained it.
One of the best phone calls I've ever received in my life was later on that night. The FBI agent called me from the governor's office and said, "You'd be glad to know that the information that I told you about, those names and everything, I got a list of them, here they are. We were right, spot on." So there wasn't any question after that.
And we went up their way, then here's this, on this desk is a stack of commutations waiting for Blanton's signature. So we thwarted that. Everybody felt good about that.
Blanton was considering other unapproved releases. 5 of those possibilities involved inmates who are being investigated by federal authorities in connection with the alleged clemency buying scandal.
Ray Blanton never forgave, he never forgot, and he never recovered from this.
Ray Blanton was never charged in the Cash for Clemency scandal, but in 1984, he was convicted of mail fraud and extortion for selling liquor licenses. He served 22 months in prison.
Governor Blanton tolerated a system of abuse and corruptness and illegality. Whether he got cash for pardons and paroles, I have no idea.
There was inferences that the governor did know about it and was involved, but I don't think so. I really don't. I think that he didn't care.
It's hard to imagine he couldn't have known about it. Maybe he didn't.
I think it's unfair to say that he did. I mean, there's no proof, actual proof.
I actually went up and met with him and told him. And when I left, I felt sick at the pit of my stomach because I thought, there's something wrong with this picture. I realized he knew.
When were these pictures?
It was the day of the inauguration. That was the early swearing in.
There are things in life time helps us forget.
It certainly was no fun, and I mean, like for 30 years, none of us even talked about it because it's like one of those things, going to war or whatever, you just don't talk about those things.
So we didn't talk about it. We worked on schools and roads and politics and whatever else we had to do. That we put that behind us and just didn't talk about it.
Then there are the things time makes sure we remember.
Keeps coming back, though. Something.
But one thing time helps us understand is why.
We found a way to work together in those 3 or 4 hours that lasted for the entire 8 years that I served.
Lamar Alexander and all these Democrats got together and showed how they could work together.
How I got sworn in was an accident. It wasn't an accomplishment. Now, it was an accomplishment to do it as well as we did it.